good morning or evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Michael Lewis, and I am going to be the moderator for this event. It's entitled People Centered and Bottom Up Community Engagement and Think Tank Involvement in Pilot Design and Implementation Lessons from the Field. We are scheduled to go from 8 o'clock until 8:45. And the session has representatives from different organizations, a think tank, et cetera, that rolled out a basic income for artists in New York. There's also a group, I think, from another area who is involved in what's called Zero Babies Homeless. These are all in the program, but we'll really talk about a part of the rollout of pilots or various kinds of initiatives like that that has to do with engaging the folks involved in the initiative, the folks receiving the benefits and things like that, how to better engage those folks and other folks who may not have received the benefits. I mean, it's sort of the implementation of pilots or things like that, and the role played by think tanks and other consultants, if you will, involved in that process, and how you interact with those who are receiving benefits and those who may not receive them if they are part of pilots. That's what the basic idea. Again, I'm Michael Lewis. I'm a teacher at Hunter College. I'm the moderator for this event. And the way it's going to be structured is we'll have about 5-minute presentations from each of our speakers. And we'll go in the order of Keiko Sono first, who is an artist associated with Forge Creatives, who is a faculty member at NYU, Shanghai, and also associated with Creatives Rebuild New York. After Almaz is done, we'll have Henry Love, ABT Associates, Zero Babies Homeless.
I think you froze.
And the last, again, we can answer the questions, talk to each other a bit. And
yeah, our moderator
time
seems
at
to
the
have
end, which I hope
unstable
there will be,
connection.
we can entertain questions from the audience. Who does? Keiko does?
No, you seem to have an unstable connection, Michael.
Oh, hold on.
You're freezing.
My connection is unstable.
Yeah, you froze. You want to go in there? I'll do everything else.
I switched rooms. I hope that helps. Am I better?
Much better.
Better? Okay. Don't know how much you got of that, so I'm going to just start with Keiko, and I'll do the other stuff at the end, right, that I should have done at the end. So sorry,
Okay,
Keiko,
great. Okay, well, thanks. And it's great to be here. Thanks everybody for joining. So my name is Keiko Sono, and I'm a lifelong artist and a UBI supporter since 2016 for the same reason. I believe that both art and UBI would have a unifying effect for communities and nations and encourage deep communication and collective problem solving that are so desperately needed in order to face the daunting challenges of our time. So I was absolutely thrilled when I was asked to join the think tank of Creatives Rebuild New York, a $125 million initiative to give 2,400 New York State artists guaranteed income and 300 artists full-time employment. However, my experience and the feedback from the Hudson Valley arts community, where I'm based, proved that such an unifying view of UBI or art is inherently in conflict with a program that has means testing or eligibility requirements. The goal of the CRNY, first and foremost, was to give New York State artists the needed financial support, and I commend the program for absolutely achieving that goal for the 2,700 artists that were selected. But for those 2,700 artists, there were more than 10 times of that number of artists who were disappointed, disgruntled, and made more cynical in their own words. As a think tank member, I raised this issue, this concern again and again, but the legal and capacity limitation in the program made it impossible to avoid this. As a result, if the goal was to elevate art and artists in our society and to put them to work on a path towards a unifying future for all of us, as I had hoped, this program probably caused a net negative impact, at least on my arts community. But it's irrelevant because these weren't the goals of CRNY. And to be clear, the administrative team of CRNY was phenomenal in tackling this impossible mission. And they and probably the board members of the funding foundations all had lofty intentions. And they heard the concerns of the think tank members, including myself. But I think that the system itself in which they operate makes it impossible to achieve or work towards such a paradigm shift because of the inherent conflict of interest. So the learning from my experience is that any programs or pilots that have eligibility requirement and lack the public education and community engagement components towards a true basic income have the potential to do more harm than good if you consider the psychology of the entire community. And this is something I would love to see the basic income community consider as we move forward. And as far as artists are concerned, despite the heartbreak, I've been so encouraged to see the resilience and
I think we lost her.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Should I go ahead
There
and
are-
if when she comes back,
Yeah.
I
we
can
do
stop
that. Yeah,
and
go
then
ahead.
she
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's do
So
that.
I'm Alma Zalecki, and I'm a professor of political science at NYU Shanghai, and I've been long involved in the basic income academic movement, studying basic income. And so I was invited into the think tank that this organization, CRNY, which stands for Creatives Rebuild New York, to help them develop their basic income and guaranteed jobs program for artists. I should say guaranteed income, not basic income. To be clear, because as Keiko was starting to say, this is not in any sense able to be a universal basic income, even for a select group like artists in New York State. They had a limited budget, and so there was going to be some selection process, and some people were going to be excluded. So it's really a program to get money out to artists, and inherent in that title, Creatives Rebuild New York, is a perspective on the role of artists in New York State, New York City, maybe in particular, but New York State in general. And so that was really the goal of the program, was to, in the wake of COVID and the economic disruptions that everybody across New York State felt because of COVID, to give money to a particular group and job opportunities to a particular group that the organization thought could be a catalyst for renewed economic growth and stimulus in New York State. So I was brought in because of my my work on basic income. And, I think that as Keiko was starting to allude to, that signified a little bit of a tension in the whole program, right? It was a program with a limited budget, funded by large nonprofits. And so there was already a structure in place. They'd already decided what they were going to do with the money that they had. And then it was kind of up to the think tank and the staff to work through the implementation details. And so I was very, privileged and honored to be a part of that conversation. And I do think that they listened very carefully and really took into account a lot of the comments that not just me, but many of the people on the think tank provided. And it was mostly artists, not mostly basic income or guaranteed income people. So I think that was terrific. And I really do think that they took some of our comments into hand when they designed the program. And I'll just give one brief example. They had a certain pot of money. And so the question was, do you increase the reach of the program by giving less money to more applicants, or do you concentrate the effect on a smaller number of applicants to increase the effect of a guaranteed income for a period of time, or a guaranteed job for a period of time, in providing economic security to those artists and allowing them to, again, sort of catalyze some kind of economic stability or growth. So they really listened to us on that front, not just me, but many of the artists on the think tank really argued in favor of a more generous amount of money for the longest time possible. And if that meant that we had to shrink the pool a little bit, then we were okay with it. Of course, as Keiko was alluding to, that has other effects. Many people applied, only a small portion were selected. But I think that's the problem with these programs and initiatives that are funded by nonprofits, charitable organizations, or funded by wealthy individuals, for example. There's a certain pot of money. We're not really changing the overall system of how we guarantee economic security to Americans. We're just doing a sort of a targeted intervention to a small group of people. Yes, it gets money into people's hands, and that's fantastic, for those people. But it's not clear to me that we're really changing the system or really getting much word out about what a truly universal basic income would mean for our country. Thank you.
I think the order was Henry next, and then Khadijah follows up. And if Keiko comes back, we'll get her involved again.
So I'll go ahead and I'll share my screen. And as I'm going, I'll start it off, and then I'll hand it over to Khadijah to sort of pick it up. So my name is Henry Love. I'm with Apt Associates, also affiliated with Homeworks. And my colleague here, Khadijah David, who's also at the Simmons Group and with Homeworks. And our intervention is called Zero Babies Homeless. So just like some background, because I think this is really important just to understand where we even came from with this, in terms of just the scale of what homelessness looks like in New York City, particularly for infants and children. So at any given point in time, there's roughly about 21,000 children at any age who are in homeless shelter in New York, with about 1,800 of those babies being babies. The other thing I want to highlight too is 97% of families who are experiencing shelter-based homelessness in New York are persons of color, families of color, and the average time spent is 460 days. And so we know that being in shelter is not a great thing for babies, right? It's a really stressful experience, and it has all kinds of detrimental outcomes as a result of that. So we sort of began this whole process with the problem of infancy being the most frequent age that someone in the U.S. experiences homelessness, which I think is surprising for a lot of people, because I think when they think of someone experiencing homelessness, they think of an older man on the street, and not necessarily a 7-month-old baby in a family shelter. And it's what we also were struggling with is that having a baby is also a really big indicator for becoming housing unstable. And I think this is a particularly relevant conversation to the unfortunate news that happened yesterday. And so when we think about this whole process, we really were setting out to figure out, how do we address family homelessness? How do we prevent it? How do we make it short and brief? And so we began this process of thinking about how do we also address at the same time the fact that 97% of families in shelter are non-white. And so we really said we have to center racial equity in this. And we really began this process brainstorming and thinking about how do we, bring intersectionality and frameworks like intersectionality into the process and the design process for that intervention. And I have Kimberly Crenshaw there, who coined that. And just a quick overview for people who may not be familiar with Crenshaw's theory of intersectionality, but basically just these different levels of identity, whether you're male, female, rich, poor, whatever, they're all sort of intersecting to create a really unique dynamic and how you're sort of navigating. And so through this, it was for us really centering the voices of those who are most impacted, and thinking about what does that mean from an intersectional framing, and how do we begin to then co-design the process of this intervention in the very early stages with folks who actually went through these circumstances. So we sort of created these workshops series around the narratives of individuals that experience shelter-based homelessness with their infants. And so that was really guiding the conversation of these workshops, but they were also folks who were researchers, policymakers, city partners, practitioners, advocates, all sort of at a table together, sort of brainstorming the processes. So once we did this, these are sort of the 4 workshops that sort of we focused on, but the first, I think, is the most critical, that's really centered around the narratives of mothers experiencing housing instability in New York City and really understanding the complexities and the nuance. And this is important because we didn't plan to go into a cash transfer program. That was totally not where we began this, but it was through this process and having conversations with Khadijah and another one of our consultants that we said, you know what, cash seems to be the thing that people are saying is the most important, and that would have really changed the dynamic. And so with Zero Babies Homeless, we really want to center this around those who have experienced housing-based instability with an infant. And that's through all of those different life cycles of the program. So in terms of the actual development, the evaluation development, and in the fundraising and implementation as well. And so I'm going to hand it over here now to Khadijah to maybe say just a little bit, like a little introduction, but also sort of like, how do we get into this process of like money? Because like I said, this was totally not how we started, but it was really grounded in, hearing, Khadijah's story about like how, like that transition and what would have helped. So I'll stop there and I'll stop sharing.
Hi, my name is Khadijah Davis, and I hope that you can hear me. So when I went homeless initially, I was around 7-8 months pregnant, more to 8 months pregnant. And baby comes out in around 9 months if it's healthy and good. And at the time, I was working a part-time job, which was not paying me enough. And then I had to go on bed rest because I'm pregnant. And my doctor told me that I should go on bed rest. At this time, the person I was living with didn't want me in their house being pregnant. Mind you, I was married, but that's beside the point. But they didn't want me to be in the house pregnant. So I had to find an apartment, not working anymore and not able to get certain vouchers in New York City, which a lot of landlords don't even take as it is. So I was struggling a lot to get in the shelter and things like that. I didn't have the money, and a program like this would have definitely helped me to pay towards rent. Knowing that I would have got other resources too to be able to pay for rent because rent is expensive in New York City. But having cash in hand would have been excellent. When I started going on my journey, actually, I asked about a voucher. I called many landlords, many people who could help me, real estate agents, and they told me they don't take vouchers. So if I had money in hand, it would help me pay for rent. If I had money in hand, it would help me pay more for food too, because you get WIC, but it's not that much money for WIC. It would help me get close to my daughter because I wasn't working. If I'm not working and I have no money, it's not a good start for my little baby to come into the world. So I was 8 months pregnant and had nothing honestly to do. Shelters were not taking me either. So this program would have been excellent to have at the time. Granted, our daughter's 6 now, so we can't do nothing about what happened before. But we can do something we can help families now. Because families need the help. The pandemic makes it even worse. We're kind of over it, but not really. We're still in it. People are still suffering. So this would have been a good program to have. Henry and people at the homeworks really, they're very helpful. They listen to us. As he said before, they didn't start out as that, but we told them having a voucher, yeah, it's nice, but not everybody takes that. Money talks. The money makes the world go round. Like having a voucher say, oh, they're gonna pay it eventually. is not really what people want to hear, or they don't like to say Section 8 in certain places. So having money and cash in hand could definitely help make a pregnant person life much better and easier, and make their child come into the world with like what a regular middle class family would need and have and be happy about. Because you don't want your child coming into the world. Think about it. If your child came into the world and they don't have good clothes, you can't afford to get formula other than if give it to them. You don't feel that good as a parent. So if you have those things to kind of help you out until you get back on your feet, I think it would be a very good program to have out there, to be honest. And they listened to everything we said, and they saw that cash would be the best way of helping out the mothers, and that's why we came to that solution of cash in hand for the mothers and the babies. So yes.
I want to hopefully we'll get Keiko back, but I have a few questions I want to ask some of the panelists. But before doing that, I want to go back to some of the things I was doing before I froze. I want a few comments I want to make about just sort of introductory comments, because I froze, I heard earlier, and you may have missed these. So they'll be brief. All I want to do, first of all, is thank the sponsors of this session, and they are the Gerald Huff Fund for Humanity, Humanity Forward Foundation, Aid Kit, and Steady. And also, if you're in the session and want to ask a question, just please post your question in the Ask a Question section. And there's also a chat function. Many of us are used to Zoom these days, so this is very similar to Zoom in some ways. There's a chat function. And also you can ask a question in the Ask a Question section. And so now I have a few questions for the panelists that I'll start with. So the first one is really about basic income or guaranteed income initiatives, pilots. I mean, this wasn't really a pilot, as I understand it. It was really more just getting money out to people. And it was really a matter of how to figure out how best to do that, given the constraints. But given these initiatives, pilots of various kinds, how do you think that these initiatives might best contribute going forward? How do these initiatives, you think, best contribute to the drive toward basic income policy? So in other words, how do initiatives like this one, in your view, contribute to an attempt to get a basic income passed at some level of government, actual policy? If that's a clear question, hopefully it is. And anyone can jump in first if you want to.
I'll go ahead, and then I'll feel free to take it, whoever else. So, I'm a researcher. And so, for me, it's the research, it's the evaluations that come out of these programs that really show us, and that we've already seen amazing things that, in terms of how powerful money can be, and just the complexity of different domains that getting increased money could have on folks. Khadijah talked about just like, the relationship between mother and child. Money can have really significant impacts on that, we think, and that was part of the reasoning for that. But also some of the findings that we've been seeing coming out in places like Vancouver, and when they did their cash transfer program, and just seeing all these different areas of reductions in substance abuse, improvements in behavioral health outcomes. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And so I think, for us, I think what's so, great about what we're doing is we think about these different populations, is making this argument that there's all these different amazing outcomes that can come from this, but it's also shifting power back to folks that are going through whatever the case is to be able to solve their issues, right? And not in a way that's, as paternalistic as a lot of welfare programs have been in the past.
I think from what we could see from when we had the little money that we was getting last year before January came in, we could see that a lot of people took the money and they put it to good use. It might be one or two out of the bunch who didn't do probably the best with it, but out of a lot of people in America who got it, it helped out the people a lot with rent, with food, with clothes, things that they actually needed. So if we saw that with a little bit of cash that the government gave out to people and to families, obviously, if we gave people more money to help them out, especially single moms or your single dads, that definitely can make a difference in somebody's life. We always say that children are our futures, and if all the children we have end up in shelter when they're young and they don't get the proper nutrition, proper education, our future is going to be dull, and we don't want that to happen. Because you imagine 20 years from now, another coronavirus happened, and we have dull people working for us. That's not going to work out well. So we need to invest in the families now so that our future can be bright again, or brighter, I should say.
Well, I know I'm here supposed to speak about CRNY, but I actually think that a program like Zero Babies Homeless is a much stronger advocate for a basic income because of exactly what Henry and Khadijah said, the power of cash as opposed to an in-kind benefit like vouchers is, just makes the difference in actually being able to find an apartment in a place like New York City. The fact that, a pregnant woman is worrying about where she's going to be living, how she's going to afford food or clothes for her baby. That is just exactly the wrong start to life for people. Academic studies have shown that the first few years of a child's life are so important in determining their lifetime outcome. And the lifetime outcome, we can think about it in a lot of ways, but if we're just thinking about it instrumentally, that's a future taxpayer, right? That's a future employee. That's somebody who would contribute to society, even if we're only looking at contribution in the narrow way that many people who consider themselves fiscal conservatives, for example, believe. So I think that the fact, particularly that Henry and his organization didn't go into this thinking cash was the answer, right? They weren't advocating for basic income, but they listened to the people whose lives are being affected by this program, and those people said cash would be helpful. I think that's incredibly powerful. The CRNY project, I think, has a limited ability to get the news out and advocacy for basic income to be more widespread, because I think one of the issues that I saw in the think tank process listening to the artists is that artists are so used to applying for grants that are merit-based, where their work is being evaluated. And artists also have very complicated financial situations, right? Some artists actually have quite high incomes if they've taken a job, for example, as being an art teacher, which means that they have a better income, but they have less time for their art. Whereas an artist who's really just devoted to their art, might not have that income, except then they might, have a show that goes really well and they sell a lot. So their income can be very volatile. And so any kinds of means-tested program, like the one CRNY was required to have because of the charitable nature of the grant, because it was funded by nonprofits, I think that the artist group that was targeted was already working with a set of structures in their minds that didn't really sync well with the guaranteed income and guaranteed jobs program that CRNY was trying to start. So again, I don't think there's nothing negative about the fact that they were able to get money out to artists or to get jobs out to artists, even a small percentage of the people who applied, but I just don't think it has much power in moving the conversation about basic income forward. I think a program like Zero Homeless Babies is much more likely to move that conversation forward.
Anyone want to respond to anything that was said before I go to the next question? Keiko's back, so we're waiting. We're trying to get Khadijah back now. Khadijah. Is it Khadijah or Khadijah? Khadijah, right? Is it pronounced? Anyway? Khadijah. Yeah. I think there she is. All right. So my second question, and I'm glad that Khadijah is back. It's really about the role that think tanks, and the term I think is lived experience consultants, because both of one initiative used a think tank, and the other used lived experience, people with lived experience regarding the issues the policy is trying to address, or the intervention we're trying to address. And the question is really about what do you think is the unique role that think tanks and those with lived experience can play in informing initiatives like this, like how they're designed, how they're implemented, things like that. Like, what is the role of these two kinds of, I guess, stakeholders, if you will?
All right. From my experience with lived experience people, because that's what I am, it seems like when a person is doing a community and a person who's like, you talk about homelessness, But everybody on the board has never been homeless, have never been poor, have never experienced or even close to it. They might say, oh my gosh, that system is broken, but they don't really know how to fix it. But a person who actually lived through the experience and could say, I know how this didn't work. I know how that didn't work because I actually lived through it. A lot of programs, even welfare, is set up a certain way to be done a certain way. When you actually live through it and go through the process, it's a different ball altogether. And a lot of people don't understand that. You might say it takes 20, 30 days to get welfare, but actuality, for some people, it might take a little bit longer, depending on who has the paperwork, who's doing it, who's the caseworker is. So having a person who actually lived through the experience, I think is the best bet to honestly help things go along and really make a difference in people's lives because they actually been through the experience themselves. So
And to add on to what everything that Khadija just said, I think what was interesting for us again is like we didn't set out to go down this cash transfer process. And originally, everyone really who was on sort of the design team and like in our I guess we call them think tank or group or whatever, wanted vouchers. And it was like very much voucher, until we got down in these weeds about like, so what does this mean for me as a Black woman with a child in a really competitive housing market going with the voucher and saying that I'm like experiencing housing instability, whatever the case may be, and all of those different intersectional biases that they're encountering. And I think it was really clear, like that story that like Khadija just showed about how those things manifest, because it was really obvious that the people who had never experienced homelessness like myself, like just you don't know that, like, you know, in theory the voucher should work XYZ, but like there's all these other loopholes and stresses and things that, like, you know, she wouldn't have been able to do in a way that could have kept her more stable, right? And so, like, you know, maybe she had a cousin that, you know, she could have given extra $100 or $200 to stay in an extra room or whatever the case may have been. You can't do that with a voucher, and so it lacks that flexibility in a way that cash is able to provide.
Yeah. I agree with everything that Henry and Khadija said. I would add that from our experience, and Almaz and I have talked about this too, the think tank process of CRNY was really, really radical. And we were really ecstatic that they included artists like me who really, you know, I haven't really been like on the radar of many organizations because, you know, I'm not really a star artist, or I haven't really been involved with any big nonprofits or anything like that. You know, the director found me on the internet, and, you know, there aren't that many artists who were supporting also UBI, so it was not that hard for her to find me. But there were other artists who really, you wouldn't really think of them as like a typical people to be really in a think tank for a big foundation like the Mellon Foundation. So I thought that it was really, really radical, and I'm really grateful for this experience. So, however, I think the biggest problem that both Almaz and I discussed about this was that the design of the program, both basic income program and the artist employment program were already pretty much set before the think tank came on. So the influence that we were able to impart on this program were just really on the details, on like how many payments there should be, or like how much the payment should be, and that kind of stuff, which is really still a really significant process that we were involved. But we kind of wish that, you know, we were brought in a little bit earlier in the process so that we could have impacted the fundamental design of both programs. So, you know, glass is half full, right? So it's still better than it happened, but it could have been better.
Amaz, do you want to jump in with any response to this first, the second question?
No, I think we can go on.
Okay.
I think Keiko and
All right.
everybody said what I would have said.
I had other questions, but I think I'm going to go to the audience, because one of the questions that I've seen is a little bit like the one I was going to ask anyway, so I'll have it come from them. So, and I'm going to paraphrase it, and I think I'm going to get it right. I hope so. This is from Jason Murphy, and he's basically saying he's noticed that many of the cash grant programs that are more targeted, like to artists or other groups, they create debate around the merits of a more universal program like basic income. So many of these are targeted, as you said, and for many people, the goal is a basic income that's more universal. And so the targeting may stoke debate about the merits of a more targeted program versus a universal one. And so the question is, does that have to happen? Is that like just inevitable that that's going to happen, that there's going to be debate about like a GI or BI, that kind of thing, targeted versus universal? Or is there a way to do these more targeted initiatives, but also maybe talk about the relevance of these to a more universal program? Like, is there a way to like do targeting, but still get the focus on universalism? That's what I think he's asking, if I have that right.
Well, I think if I could jump in, I think an initiative like Zero Babies Homeless that took an existing program that is in kind, right? So a housing voucher, and shifted the conversation to cash. That's not exactly Jason's question, but I think it's in the spirit of his question, right? That I think gets people more generally to think, are there situations where instead of giving people, food stamps, right, that can only be used on food, housing vouchers that can only be used on housing, whatever else, maybe, it's support for formula or for other nutrition for pregnant women and their babies. Just give people the cash and let them just, figure out what they can, what they need the cash for and what they can get in, gifts from friends or families for the other things. Like, as Henry said, maybe a room in somebody's house, but now I need, I want to spend that money on, adequate nutrition or clothing or other items for my child. So I think that these, a program like Zero Babies Homeless can really help to shift the conversation around cash versus in-kind benefits. I think it's much harder when we're talking about targeted programs shifting the conversation to universal programs, because almost all of the pilots that I'm aware of, have this charitable need, means testing aspect to it because of the funding sources, not necessarily because of the intentions of the people running the programs, but because the funding sources are from nonprofits. Nonprofit funds have to be used for charitable reasons, and charitable reasons means there has to be a means test. So I think that's a harder jump to make. I think it's possible, but I think that's a much harder jump to make than the in-kind to cash benefits.
Does anyone else?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, sure. If I can jump in, I agree with Almaz that I think there is an inherent difficulty in tying universal or basic income with guaranteed income pilots or programs, just because of this, the nature of the guaranteed income programs and also the funding sources, and also. What I think I got cut out in my speech. What I wanted to say at the end was that I was really encouraged to see, like, aftermath of this rollout of CRNY, how the artist community, even though they were so heartbroken and disheartened, they're so resilient, and they're so creative. So on a local level and personal level, they really move on. And, that's kind of where I really find hope in, and also in programs like, Zero Babies Homeless, that's really so much more grounded on the community and the people. And so I think, I'm kind of starting to see more hope in those smaller and, community-based programs or entities than like large institutions or charity organizations led initiatives. I think they all have to happen both, but I think large organizations are really limited by so many, parameters. So they will not be, that's not enough to rely on them. It really has to come from like all like personal and community levels. And, I kind of feel good about that, frankly, as an artist myself.
Does either Kadisha or Henry want to comment on this question, or is it the?
I mean, Well, I kind of want to add on something from the two of them, but also like in the chat, something was raised, and I just do want to flag that because I think it's important to this conversation too about like sort of this movement and sort of like these biases that folks may have about giving people cash, because right, and Khadijah mentioned this, was like, okay, if I give this person cash, they're gonna go buy drugs, and it's like, but when you get money, do you just go buy drugs? And it's like, no. And so it's like, you know, I think we began this process with assuming it's like a mother wants to do the best thing for their child, no matter who the mother is, right? And why do we have to control what kind of food they buy, what kind of home they have to live in, check it. And it was as we were interrogating why people were so hell-bent on vouchers and voucher-like things, it was a surveillance component. And it was like or even if we gave out money, it was like, oh, well, we got to have some type of check mechanism to figure out what they're spending the money on. And it was like we had to really interrogate that and really go deep on why do you not trust these women with money? And what do you think is going to happen with that money? And like pushing it, and it got it got really uncomfortable. And there was and this is part of these conversations that must be had. And you know, it took some of our white allies having some of these conversations with folks who had really problematic sort of interpretations of this community, but were in positions of power, right? In the city government, right? And pushing them on this about like, okay, like this is why this is really problematic. And I think this is really about this movement as a whole. And it's like, but then you see what happens in like Vancouver, where you give people cash and there's these amazing things that happen. They actually use substance abuse less. And so I know that it was kind of a little tangent, but I just wanted to flag that because I think it's just a really important element to this conversation that I think is one of the big arguments against guaranteed income.
Michael.
Khadijah, you want to jump in? Go ahead. Was it Almaz?
Yeah, sorry. I didn't want to stop Khadijah from saying something, but I just
she said no.
Okay.
So you're good. Yeah.
I just wanted to share another experience that I think is related. So as part of the pandemic spending in New York City, all families with children in the public schools were given EBT cards to cover school lunches and that were lost in the summer when people couldn't, when the kids couldn't be at school, and you know, to cover other food assistance that was given in the schools, which in New York City is given to all students. There's no means test required for it, but it is the first time that families that did not meet that means test were given EBT cards to use, you know, in grocery stores. So, you know, I think it's been an interesting experience for some of the people I've talked to, including to a white man I was talking to yesterday, who had the experience of going to the grocery store, buying food with the EBT card, and not being able to buy dishwashing detergent along with the food. That has to be paid for separately. Another person, you know, that I talked to was surprised that they went with the card. They didn't have any cash. They didn't have a bag, so they had to pay 10 cents or something for the bag at the store. The bag, you know, isn't paid for. It isn't covered by the EBT card. So I think, you know, the fact that that program became a universal program for a short period of time, and people who don't normally have to navigate the system are just understanding exactly how hard it is for people, you know, who need these benefits to navigate the system. How on earth are you going to prepare food without having dishwashing liquid or detergent? How are you going to take the food home, you know, without the bag? Why do we pay for one thing and not the other?
I was going to ask another question, but it's 8:44, and we're supposed to end at 8:45. So I guess I'm supposed to be on time. So I'm going to let it end there. And I do have some closing comments that like there's a script that I'm supposed to follow. And basically all I want to say is that I want to thank everyone for attending, both the audience and the panelists. I want to thank all of you. And if you'd like to get involved in more conversation, you can head over to Kumo Space, which I think you've gotten links for in emails from the conference organizers. And there's also a plenary session coming up called Supporting Babies, Ending Child Poverty. So that's it. Again, I want to thank everyone for showing up. Thank the audience, the panelists. And I hope we all got something out of it. So I'll see you later, and thank you again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Take care.